Hello, everyone. This is the Revolutionary Think Tank podcast. This is episode 16. And if this is the first time you hear, this is a podcast about political commentary, protest music, and revolutionary thinking. My name is 4AS, and this is my co-host, Mr. E. So, Mr. E, how are you going today?
I am very well, 4IS. How are you?
Yeah, I'm going pretty well. And you've been doing some very interesting videos lately.
Thank you.
And I thought it would be great to touch on the ideas in your converting the right uh, video that you did,
Mm,
because I think it does talk on some very broad points about, the exchange of ideas between at least the ideologies being on the left and the right.
mm,
And at least in my perspective, which I'll probably touch on later, there seems to be a general consensus that I'm not saying this is a right perception, but that the left is very judgmental and the right is very stupid. But I don't really think things are far more nuanced because a lot of people think of the working class as a left ideology, but the thing is, a lot of conservative people also vote right. And this kind of goes into the idea that you discuss in your Converting the Right video is that, well, conservatives can also be part of the working class. And if you really want solidarity, not only do you create solidarity with people that are on the left side of politics, but eventually you're going to have to do exactly the same with people on the right.
Yeah, I think it's very, very crucial issue, fundamental to the revolution.
Mm.
If you look at it from a socialist perspective, the social revolution is a kind of a struggle, obviously. Well, it's a struggle between class versus class. It's not a struggle between two ideological positions or identity politics or sides of that type of spectrum between people with this set of ideas and that. It's got nothing to do with that. It's either you're in the dominant class
Mm.
or you're in the submissive class, and that's basically how it's broken down. So, like, if you want to have play games with my way of seeing things is better than yours and vice versa, that's fine, but it's still or generally done between the masses of society.
Mm.
Those types of political games and let's pick a side kind of thing, and hating on somebody else because they don't have the exact same values as you, because you've grown up in this environment and they've grown up in maybe in this environment, and so you never see eye to eye politically. But that's fine. There's nothing wrong with having different views to someone, especially if you look at the world conservatively, from an economic perspective, or progressively from an economic or
Mm.
social perspective. That's fine. I think it's important, actually, to have differing views. That's what makes the world go round.
Mm.
And that's what makes human culture and societies so complex and flourish so well. But if you get lost in that, that's where all the danger is. And so the people must understand that there is only one war, and it's a class war. And in order for there to be any type of progress in terms of a social evolution from the current world order until whatever the next way of organizing ourselves is, we will not have that in terms of an improvement on what we've got at the moment unless there is solidarity amongst all working people. And I think left or right, it doesn't really matter, but I think leftists are very elitist because they seem to like to state that they figured that out, but in practice, they do not carry it out. There is no actual understanding or there's no physical application of the idea that we're all in the working class despite our political tendencies, and really we should be uniting with one another in order to grapple the real enemy, which is not each other, it's the establishment.
And I really want to reinforce that point of the judgmental side of it, because there's actually a term that I've recently come across, which is known as pigeon chess. And what that actually means is when you're basically discussing something, like a contest of ideas between someone that you kind of see as inferior, what you perceive as pigeon chess is to basically use the imagery of what that is saying is that, well, you can never truly reason with the other person, because like a pigeon, you can be a grandmaster chess player, but at the end of the day, the other person is just so stupid that they'll just knock off all the pieces on the board and then shit off the board and then run off like they've won the argument. Now,
Yeah.
like, it's not necessarily that everything about that statement is wrong, but I think it's misunderstanding the difference of views. Like, let's take something that's low hanging fruit. Let's talk about the rise of Trump and how he was able to capture white America. And the thing is, in the aftermath of Obama, he was supposed to be the big changer, the black president that was going to bring a huge amount of change. But the thing is, if I'm not mistaken, around that time, nothing really much changed, and I think inflation was going up, and at least the general middle class and working class, there wasn't really that much improvement after Obama left office. And when Hillary was basically competing against Trump, he was able to at least capture people, or at least the working class people that he was pitching to. He was able to create a common enemy, which was, and say all those outlandish things of, hey, we're going to build a giant wall in Mexico and make the Mexicans pay for it. Like, he was at least able to catch people's xenophobia, but more importantly, if inflation is going up, if nobody has a job and people are looking for someone to blame, then it's much easier to say, this minority group or this group of people are the reason for something, rather than some economist sitting down with you and saying, well, see, the situation is quite complicated because of this reason, for this reason, for this reason. So, like, as soon as you have a X equals Y situation, then you can at least understand why people get into a fervor, and they believe that it's because of this group of people that all of their problems can be put onto that. So once you understand that there is a certain psychology behind why people think the way they do, then you can start to at least reason with them. It's the classic line from Ted Lasso. I'm not sure whether you've seen it, is that be curious, not judgmental. It's when you, instead of debating a person, because this is where I think there's a huge distinction between philosophy and debating. See, debating is, you have premise 1, 2, and 3 and conclusion, where no matter what, you really don't care about the other points that somebody brings in, just as much as you win the argument. But it's the reason why I always live by the quote from Aristotle, which is philosophy is the ability to entertain an idea without accepting it. And that sort of idea brings in an element of empathy, because if you can at least get on somebody else's level, and maybe somebody else's level that doesn't agree with you, if they believe that the Mexicans did it, for example, you can be like, well, hey, yeah, like interest rates have gone up, cost of living has gone up. Like, well, you know, the Reserve Bank decided to put up the rates. Do you really think that it's a reasonable thing to say that it's because the Mexicans did it?
Yeah.
Like, and then when you, I think a lot of people can talk about, or at least talk about rationalizing, or at least go about logic in a very bad way, or at least in a very bad faith way. And that's where a lot of the conflicts comes from, if you get what I'm talking.
There's a lot of things to unpack there, what you just talked about. So let's go back to like Trump then. And I think Trump is a great example to talk about this type of stuff, because whether lefties like to acknowledge this or not, Trump was completely able to mobilize the working class. And if anything, that's positive, because that just shows you the power of the working class. Once it is being given a direction and it's being given some form of motivation, it doesn't take much for it to spiral into a large and a movement with a lot of momentum and potentially a lot of energy behind it. And so Trump was able to obviously ride on the back of that, like you've described. He was able to use usual conservative logic, which is fear of the other, to justify, his aims. But obviously he was just, I guess, manipulating those people or co-opting those people into serving his own corporate agenda. Because, let's be honest, where was the wall?
Yeah.
And like that's a case in point as to the fact that he never really had working class intentions, at the forefront of his policy or his ambitions, but he was able to ride those perfectly to get basically what he wanted. And people are still caught up in like his kind of just general esteem and his legacy. And he's become kind of a lot more than just a political figure, but somewhat of an idol. And so what you started talking about in terms of people's dissatisfaction from, general, I think we can both agree on neoliberal policy for the last, so many decades, has brought out this great and general dissatisfaction amongst working people. And so like if people divide themselves along certain ideological lines or identity politics, and they define themselves by that, it's easy to obviously divide the working class into massive sections. But like inherently, I think it's important though that we recognize that, yes, the working class, the people that brought Trump into power were not, upper middle class people or, upper class people. They were working class Americans. And some of them, tragically working class people, almost, stereotypical in a way, in terms of like slices of Americana. They really were kind of, or they're made out to be anyway, kind of, cliched Americans. And generally those cliche types of Americans that I'm talking about, from kind of rural or Midwestern areas and all that sort of stuff, they're cliched and all that sort of stuff, but they represent an important part of society, of American culture, and that is working class people. And so like you have to then ask yourself, like you were talking about before, whether it's these people have been, energized and put on a certain tirade for a particular reason to serve somebody else's political agenda, But like where their dissatisfaction and their problems come from, that is a true and a real place. They are upset because of their work. They're upset because of like the cost of living is rising. They're upset because things that they held traditionally have been taken from them. And those are all factors and emotions that are felt by all people in the working class. And so if anything, that should signify to all of us that we all have the same grievances. We all have the same problems. We're all victims of, this capitalist system and global order that we're all subject to. And yes, just because we align ourselves differently politically, we can accept that. And if we can accept that, that doesn't mean that we have to lose sight of the end goal. And the end goal is obviously mobilizing to make some type of, representation, or just literally standing up to the political establishment itself and our corporate overlords. Being able to, the only thing that stops us from being any effective power against them is unifying. And so the Trump example is great, yes, because it just shows us how well the working class can be mobilized into action once it's given the right motivations. It's quite a good example. And I think that like a nice kind of case study in that is that you had recently, I think, or maybe over the last year or something, John Deere is a American brand. I think they make tractors and other things that you'd need, like plant machinery and all that sort of stuff. Anyway, a large section of their workforce was on strike recently, and a large section of their workforce, working people in their factories and what have you, which was still in America, were on strike recently because they were changing conditions and stuff. And a large majority of these people were, very outright and outspoken Trump supporters. However, this massive corporation had started cutting their conditions and was looking to cut back on their workforce and stuff like that. And these people went out on strike. They were openly and proud Trump supporters. However, they were feeling the pinch of corporate might and corporate greed, and they were rallying and striking together with in unions, which are typically leftist organizations, and they were happy to unionize to fight against the evil machine. And for people that went out there to support them, socialists and socialist parties and stuff like that, it was a very strange coming together of people on very different ends of the spectrum. You would have had them fighting each other literally and physically, when I say that, a few months earlier, maybe in some type of Black Lives Matter protest, but they've come together in a union kind of situation because there was working class solidarity. They needed the support from other working class people because they were striking against the evil corporation that was about to take away their jobs and their livelihoods and stuff like that. Socialists and other union type groups were coming to their aid, and they were all working together, even though they were openly discussing with one another while they're picketing and they're organizing and stuff like that. Hey, yeah, I just voted for Trump. I did this for this reason. Hey, I'm a socialist for this reason. And they're converging, they're meeting, they're mixing ideas. And I think this is really important. Like you can have differences of political opinion, but still have the same grievances at the end of the day, share similar values because you're from the same class. And like the Trump phenomenon really gives us a good kind of cross-section about how those worlds collide. It's very, very interesting.
I think this might be a good time to also add, I don't think you covered this specifically in that converting the right video, but there is another great point that you make in a prior video where basically the political game or the political system as it now stands, whether that's in America, whether that's in Australia, it's not a coincidence that a majority of the time politicians are made up of, ex-lawyers. That this is an arena that is very specialized. This is an arena where it can be very opaque to the average citizen, and um, uh, that its opaqueness is by design. And I want to bring up a story of a friend of mine that has, she has very much said to me that, she's not at all interested in politics. But I actually recently ended up having a conversation with her um, about politics on a very broad way. Is that we were discussing, how things can be improved. And what was fascinating about that conversation was, um, whilst she didn't know the machinations of what was happening in Australian politics, she could at least tell me that, well, representational democracy is like, it's all right, but it's not perfect. Like, she was discussing with me that, well, hey, things could be far more participatory. Like, we could participate far more in politics. And me, Mr. E, I decided to discuss my ideas about delegates within politics and how that could be a better system. But as soon as I did something, like I at least discuss topics of, rather than what the inflation rate is or what the cash rate is, and started talking about, well, actually a delegate system is X, Y, and Z, then she was able to talk with, oh, actually, I didn't know about that. That actually sounds quite cool, and it might be even better than what we already have. Is that the reason why I bring that up is that, well, people, even if they're not within a subject, they might know like what is wrong with the system, at least from like they can feel it within their gut, of what is wrong, or at least what can be improved. Like, you don't necessarily have to be an expert, and if you're actually willing to um, uh, talk with people, at least in a generalist way, and then work your way to being a bit more specific and being like, well, actually, if you think about it in this way, um, this actually may be better for the system, then you can get people more involved.
Yeah. Yeah, I think you have to be as inclusive as you can when you're thinking about discussing politics with other people or discussing revolution with other people, because I understand why it's very important to draw the line on certain issues, and certain things might not be tolerable. But like, from a majority of people, and try to make this point in the video, is that a majority of right-wing people are not right-wing extremists. They're not the type of people that are going to try out some type of genocidal regime where they want to wipe out some form of migrant that's moved into their country and taken all their jobs and all that sort of stuff. Most people that are right-wing leaning, 99% of them, I'm just going to pull a number out like that, are right-wing leaning because they have there's perspectives on the right wing and explanations for how the world works that suits their understanding of the world and their general experience. They see the animosity around them. They see the problems with the economy. They see the uncertainty on the horizon. And like, if they get a little taste of right-wing ideals, then that's just presented to them more easily, or they're more susceptible to be exposed to that because of family circumstances or the people that they hang out with, then they will tend to gravitate towards those ideals. But like, having a balanced conversation with someone and not belittling them and making them feel stupid for their ideas does set the stage for having a better conversation with
Mm.
people. And like people that are right wing leaning are more easily, I think, converted, or at least you can win them over on maybe
Mm.
one particular issue out of 10 matters that you can talk about, and get people to see the light on some of those issues and get them thinking in a different way. But you have to be willing to have that balanced conversation. And you have to be willing to be a little bit more empathetic, which is what you were talking about before.
Mm.
There's no reason to go into conversations guns blazing, sorry, and being the chess master and just thinking that everyone else is a pigeon. You know, if you're
Mm.
going to do that, especially with right-wing leaning people, I would suggest that people that are pushing a little bit more towards the extreme side of the right-wing spectrum, all that you're going to do is get their back up. And that sort of energizes them to, stick to their guns a little bit more. And if anything else, just kind of solidifies their position. But like, unless there is an understanding out there that there needs to be some type of winning people over, and trying to convert people that have conservative ideals that have no basis. There are some important conservative ideals out there. There are some matters on the right-wing agenda, as we just discussed before, that are also on the left-wing agenda, and vice
Mm.
versa. They cross over because they're issues to working people. If you can speak to those things, you can cover ground and make sure that people can see things on either side and just form a general connection. You don't have to win arguments, but if you can bridge gaps between people, so much can be done in the way of progressing the system at large, because it's the
Mm.
division and keeping these people fighting against each other, which is what allows the status quo to be the status quo.
Yeah, because really, at the end of the day, what is politics? And politics is really the contest of ideas about change. And at least on the spectrum, people on the left very much want change to happen radically, and on the right, well, I'm taking stereotypes here, but on the right, they want to change. Not so much. They want things to kind of stay the way they are. And at least when I was advocating before, be curious, not judgmental, um, that's very hard. Because the thing is, because with the internet nowadays and people doing hot takes left, right, and center, it's very easy to be polarizing. It's very easy to have your points 1, 2, and 3 and die on that hill. It's when at least in your perception, because that's the other thing about humans, is that we like to think that we're incredibly logical, but really we do run on emotions. And you fact check those points 1 and 2 and 3. You so much believe in it. And if somebody says the slightest thing that's different to you, you're willing to die on that hill. And this goes back to what I was saying before. Well, what you've just done is great in a debate. You've might have fact checked, you might have gotten all of the graphs about how brilliant your points are, but there's no point in you saying all of that when you've just made the other person defensive and they end up just not listening to you.
Yeah.
So if you're eventually going to basically force yourself into the corner when nobody listens to you, then what was the point in wasting all of that hot air?
And that's the thing, like a lot of people will say, like I find leftists and stuff like that, or people that are potentially revolutionary will say, well, what's the point of having those conversations? These people are set in their ways. And like, we're not here to convert people to the cause kind of thing. We've got our own agendas and stuff like that. And I just think that it's just a cop out. It's a horrible perspective. because that was never the intention, I believe, in terms of revolutionary aims, is to just exclude people because they think differently to you and like they're just not worth converting because they have different ideas. That is poor form, in the sense of being a revolutionary, because revolutions don't happen by just allowing, like, or just, excluding people from the general ethos and from the general kind of understanding that you're kind of trying to bring into being. You must have, whether people agree with it or not, you must at least have people, and usually this is done through some type of propaganda machine, but you must have people that are understanding the issues that you're talking about to some degree. They must be aware of them. Whether they can converted by them or subscribe to them is a completely different matter. But like if they're not exposed to your ideals, because you're engaging them in a debate or making them think about things by pushing things in their face and nudging them nicely to consider this or consider that. If you're not even providing them with that substance to consider, then like that is just, I think, elitist crap. It's just elitist crap, and like it gets you nowhere.
Well, I think you do raise a good point there that at least in a propagandist machine or at least when you're speaking to someone, you need to realize, like, you need to make sure that you understand, like, when you're using terms, that you are using the term in exactly the same way. Because I can tell you right now that I was at a dinner party with my with my partner, and one of our friends that again wasn't politically minded at the dinner party said, like, oh, I'm not some sort of anarchist. And I think they were probably using this in the propaganda mind of somebody that was into total chaos. And my partner looked at me and I had a very wry smile on my face because she knew that I knew the history behind the term anarchist, which was not the way that our friend was using it. And see, that was obviously a person that I didn't end up talking to, but I could have taken to the side and said, well, actually, do you know the history behind anarchism? Let's have a quick chat, my good sir. And
expose them to some type of new idea.
Yeah.
Like it's very quickly, like that type of thing, you don't have to convert to be an anarchist to just at least hear the story of what anarchy as a social theory is, as opposed to some type of chaotic world of The Walking Dead where people just, death lurks around every corner and it's like a dog eat dog world. It's got nothing to do with that. It's about, individuals' freedom and basically ensuring that people live equally and in really social liberal societies. It's got nothing to do with chaos and disorder and stuff like that, even though those are the premises that bring you that type of social model. And so, like, having a conversation, even at the dinner party in front of other people, is the type of stuff that you can do, the little steps that you can take to convert right-wing mindsets, propagandized mindsets, conservative mindsets that are kind of, all about keeping the status quo, or reactionary mindsets that try to pull us back to an earlier age where life was simpler and all that sort of stuff. But, there is nothing wrong with wanting to do that. And I want to make that absolutely clear to all you revolutionaries out there and all of those people that, you would describe yourself as an ardent leftist. There's nothing wrong with trying to convert someone or having a conversation. It's like you said a number of times, I think it's a good point here. It's not a debate. You're not there to win. But if you can impart some knowledge to people or make them say, I haven't thought of it like that before. Kind of like those, Trump's supporters at a John Deere strike that started converging with socialists that they had no idea they had anything in common with, and they start finding out they have common ground because they are workers in the same struggle against the oppressive bosses and the rulers of capital. Then they start to be able to see the world for what it is, a very complex place full of varying social connections and relations and all that sort of stuff. However, there is only two positions that you really have to worry about, and that is those who own the means and those who work for a living. And like, you can really split us all into these two camps. Yes, there's crossover. Yes, I understand there's, you know, it's a blur between the lines, but for a large majority of people, we fit into the working people's camp. And unless that camp, because there's much more of us, it's harder to organize. Unless there is some type of unity amongst us, there will be no social progress. If anything, I believe there will be regression. And that's why people are scared of the right wing, because it represents social regression, because, you know, it can descend into barbarism. Look at Nazi Germany. Like, there is a good case there for why unbridled right-wing behavior can turn into, you know, evil dictatorships where, you know, democracy is thrown out the window, and you have people descending into real chaos and like real dog-eat-dog world situations. And so there's a trepidation around wanting to deal with right-wing people because, you know, what's the point kind of thing. But like, I think those are the people that need to be talked to the most. It's not other lefties, it's not other people or like revolutionaries or people that are, you know, part of the choir already. You need to preach to them. If you want to do something constructive, if there's people that are in your social circles or acquaintances of yours that are on the fringes of being right-wing and they're interested, or they would entertain a discussion with you on something, and you want to set yourself a challenge, enlighten people to what it is that you know, and try and get the ball rolling.
Yeah. There's two final examples that I want to kind of use that I think it lends to the idea of how sometimes with concepts, time can distort a concept. So what I mean by that is, the first example is the idea of a redneck. So when you think of a redneck, you probably think of somebody that is similar to the synonym of a hillbilly, somebody that's possibly right-wing, but somebody who's stupid and doesn't really know that much. But the funny thing about the redneck, if I'm not mistaken, is the term is actually referring to a union member, and the person that was on the picket line that would stand out on the midday sun, and they would be a redneck because they would stand in solidarity with their brothers and sisters and stand on that picket line. Yet through history, suddenly what's developed into this idea of somebody that's equivalent to a hillbilly and somebody who's really stupid, it's turned into an anti-union term, when really it is a term of honor that you would stand on the picket line with your brothers and sisters. And that's very interesting about history and, again, propaganda. Now, the second idea is a little bit closer to home with conservatives, and I want to talk about Robert Menzies. Now, Robert Menzies, yes, he's the conservative. He's here in Australian politics. He's the conservative poster boy of, I think he's either the second longest running prime minister or the longest running prime minister, and everyone loves his conservative politics. But what people don't focus on is that whilst yes, he was, unions weren't for him, and everything, at least in terms of, the 8 hour working day and everything that would be under the Labour Party's remit. It's not necessarily that he wanted to dismantle those sort of things. There's actually quite a few quotes from him being like, hey, okay, unions are a thing. They obviously exist in this world, but you know, you kind of just do your thing. I realize that this is an important part of leftist thinking in Australian politics. Like, I will do nothing to mess with your systems, but I just don't want things to change the way they are. See, if you were to view right-wing politics in this post-neoliberal world, you would have assumed that Menzies would have been like any sort of conservative that was out to smash unions and to push down wages and that sort of thing. But really, in the 40s and 50s, when he was the prime minister, no, he like whilst he didn't want that much change to the way Australian politics was, he was also respectful of how at least the left side of politics functioned. Whilst he wasn't going to push their agenda, he also wasn't going to mess with their systems. And you got to you got to remember that yeah, you can think of yourself as rational on the left side of politics, but the right views themselves in exactly the same light.
Yeah,
And that we might have perceptions, but it's that contest of ideas that we find the right path to the future.
I think that's a really good point. There's a lot of a lack of respect. There's the identity politics, and the divide between left and right has really caused us to be dehumanizing of our opponents. And we do forget that they are other people, and they are other people that are faced with tough decisions on a daily basis, and they're met with hard challenges on a constant basis because of the state of the world, the economy, social organization, what have you. And if we kind of just remember that these are other people that we're dealing with, then at the end of the day, there is a little bit of respect brought back in here. Like, past conservatives would show to past progressives and vice versa. If we can remember just to provide a little bit of room for respect, there's much more ground to come to some type of happy medium on situations, and organize in our class interests, which is the real shared goal here. It's the real point of solidarity. It doesn't matter, I guess, what your differences are at the end of the day. You come together to fight for a common cause. And yes, I think that's really poignant that it all comes down to a level of respect. Without that, there is no grounds for converting anyone or bringing on the revolution.
And I think that's a really good point to end the conversation. As always, guys, the Synthwave R for this week, it was converting the right in politics. And for whatever reason, it spat out a poster boy in a suit with cool sunglasses, as you do. But I'll release that to my page, and I'll keep that synthwave art coming. But thank you for tuning in again to this talk. Just remember, guys, to keep thinking and keep learning. And to sign us off, I'll pass it over to you, Mr. E.
Thank you, 4AS. And to everyone out there, please remember, I am, you are, we are a mystery.